Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan McCrory, and I am my title is I'm the artistic director of the National Black Theater. I'm a very close friend of Daniela, who is the artistic director of Rattlestick, who has created this beautiful evening for us, or a beautiful opportunity this afternoon to have a conversation about our humanity in the age of COVID-19. As many of us have learned how this virus has impacted, this pandemic has impacted our ability to connect with one another, our ability to think about what the future might look like, our ability to kind of take that next step. We're hoping that this conversation creates the potential of a salve, a potential of articulation, a potential of navigation, of creating in my tradition of being African American, the North Star. For us to find our guideposts inside of all of this tumultuous terrain. And to kind of set us off, I would love our panelists to actually come on one by one, telling us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, where you hail from, and what's on the top of your heart and mind in this current moment. So giving us your name, potentially your pronouns if you prefer, what's top of mind as we think about this conversation, and where do you hail from? And I'll model. My name is Jonathan McCrory. My pronouns are he, him. My spirit is a she, and I hail from Harlem, New York right now. Top of mind for me is about how soft can we be and still be resilient? How soft can we be in this time, but still be extremely resilient in our humanity? Jeffrey, if you want to start. Jeffrey?
Got it. So my name is Geoffrey Jackson Scott. I am the creative director of People Mover, which is a consulting firm that specializes in involvement. We work all across theater and opera and live public art and film. My pronouns are he, him. I hail originally from Quincy, Illinois, very small river town in this country. I live now in Brooklyn, so I'm calling in today from Bed-Stuy. There's so many things that are top of mind for me. Maybe the top is that tomorrow is day 60 for me of being an inside kid. And so really reflecting on the things that have surfaced for me, what I've been learning in this silence, and really being able to drop down into my voice and into my passions.
Yue, do you mind going next?
Hi, my name is Yue. I'm the managing director of Rattlestick. Originally, she, her, hers. Originally, I'm from China. I moved to Oregon in 2011, stayed there for 2 years, and moved to New York in 2013. What's on my mind right now? Safety, I think that's the most important thing on my mind right now. And also how to make people unite together, work together, and solve this pandemic, the international pandemic right now, and how to help each other.
Thank you. And David, do you mind being our last but not final, our last guest for this evening? Yes, do you mind?
Hi, so I'm David Henry Hwang. I'm a playwright. He, him, I was born in Los Angeles, but I've been living in New York since the early 90s, so I think of myself as a New Yorker now. And I guess I'm thinking about two things. I mean, number one, it feels to me like this is sort of an inflection point. And given the severity of this historical moment and historical precedent, you could really see people going in one of two directions as this starts to be over. We could become more humane, more democratic, recognize our interrelatedness internationally, or we could become more nationalistic, more authoritarian. And so I think that's a pretty critical inflection point. And then just personally, as an Asian American, I'm of course very conscious of the rise in anti-Asian hate in this country. And I think several of us on this panel have experienced some degree of harassment or intimidation, racial threat. And so that's something that we're all dealing with on a personal level.
Thank you for that. I think it's a perfect framing, actually, to get us into the artistic offering, which is one of your works, Soft Power. Do you mind giving us a little bit of context? And then I invite Francis to come in and then to present the work for us.
Thank you. So Soft Power is a show that we premiered in Los Angeles last spring, and then spring of 18, and then did some revisions and opened it at the Public Theater here in New York in the fall. And essentially it's a play that becomes a musical, but the part that's relevant to the excerpt that we're about to hear is that Francis is playing a character named DHH, who's an Asian American playwright who is struggling after the 2016 election with whether or not he is going to have a place in this country. And I think that's all you need to know to enjoy the monologue. This is Francis, who originated the role of DHH in Soft Power and is a recent Lucille Lortel Award winner as of a couple nights ago.
Without further ado, Francis, if you don't mind taking this.
Am I even going to be able to live in this country anymore? Almost half the population just voted for a guy who thinks we don't really belong here, that we should be nothing more than supporting characters in someone else's story. It's like when I was a kid, this country had been at war with Korea, Japan, Vietnam, and China was our big enemy. So all the Asians in the shows were nothing more than supporting characters, bad guys, sexy women, or jokes. And they never belonged in America. Whenever I saw a face like mine, I braced myself because I knew something terrible was gonna. I hear myself yelling, "What the fuck?" My whole head, it's ringing. What happened? Ow, I slam into a wall. The street is spinning. I hit a parked car. The sidewalk like waves. Do I have a concussion? I'm bleeding. Stabbed in the neck. What the fuck? I'm gonna die. No, get to the hospital. Just 2 blocks away. I can't walk. Wait, Boy Scouts, put pressure on a wound. Step, I'm walking straight. I can do this, just 2 blocks away. Don't look back, just keep going. What's that sound? Blood in my shoes. Cross DeKalb Avenue, reaching Brooklyn Hospital. I'm gonna faint now. Then, in the moment before I lose consciousness, a whole world passes before my eyes.
Thank you, Francis.
Yes, thank you very, very much. And just to dive right in, just to think about some of these beautiful offerings that come out of this work that you have written, David, and that you performed, Francis. I would love for the panelists to kind of think about these words of what does it mean to have a sense of belonging? How does belonging live inside of our psyche today? Knowing that we are living in a virtual space, but we're also living in a We talked about a global space of threat, a space of terror, where some of us are living in a space of looking at how do we become optimistic in this moment? What is a sense of belonging? And then also the idea of owning one's narrative. What does it mean to own one's narrative in this moment and knowing how to navigate the space of that narrative? We can start there. I have other parts to build off of, but the idea of owning one's narrative and the idea of belonging, we can start there. Whoever wants to.
I guess I can give a little more, just sort of a little background on the fact that the stabbing in the show is based on an actual stabbing that happened to me a few years ago on my block around 9 p.m. and I was just coming home with groceries and I was stabbed in the neck by an unknown assailant. And I think that in terms of this question of owning narrative, I'm sort of pathologically compartmentalized as a human being. So I didn't really let the trauma of having almost been killed affect me very much. And even the way you can sort of hear the way I talk about it now. I talk about it very, very casually. By writing the show and creating a character who went through this experience, I think it interestingly became a way for me to take the attack on me more seriously, because I had a team of collaborators around me, director Lee Silverman, my composer Janine Tesori, Oscar Eustace, our producer from the Public Theater. Like, you have to take your stabbing more seriously. And I learned a lot of things about how I actually felt about that trauma by owning that narrative and making it into art.
And what I'm just going to invite all of the panelists to actually stay unmuted if you actually can. So you could just dive right in, and I'm going to ask pointed questions, but if we just stay unmuted, this can become more of a conversation than statements, so that we really create the heat and the energy as much as we can as we're virtual. Something that you're bringing up, David, that I just want to add to the conversation, to highlight, is this notion of what does it mean to acknowledge or to stomach the situation that is uncomfortable, the victimhood that's uncomfortable inside of us. How do we create mechanisms of coping? How do we create mechanisms of escape? How do we create mechanisms of diluting the pain, right? And when we think about COVID-19 in particular, where are we diluting the severity or the reality of what is actually happening to us as human beings? We are radically going to be changed by this moment. And I think that what's really beautiful about what you're bringing up and what we can think about and what we can learn from, right? I won't call it beautiful, but this necessary conversation that Oprah had with a person who had experienced solitary confinement, and saying that now that we're in the space of COVID-19, now that we're all being isolated, what can we learn from how people who have been in solitary confinement, what can we learn from that situation? I think that we can also learn from your situation as well. But I also invite Yue and Geoffrey to respond as well.
Yeah, one of the things that comes almost immediately, both in response to your piece, David, and the piece of it that Francis has read, and what you're saying also, Jonathan, my experience, and I'm saying it this way because it is my belief that all of us are experiencing this moment in really particular and specific ways. How I am experiencing this moment, everything about the life that I led before is radically different. So I have a pre-existing condition, which you probably can hear some of right now, like my voice will probably drop in and out. I was born a couple of months premature, and one of my lungs wasn't developed. And so I have a cystic lung disease, and on top of that, asthma. So long before the country was responding, I was really keyed into the fact that there was something happening around the world that was potentially going to come here, because it is specifically targeting folks with pre-existing conditions and all of us. And so I was really paying attention to it. So in the coming inside now for almost 60 days, the the noise, if you will, in my life is very different. I'm inside. The quality of sound, the quality of my attention to my own life and energy is radically shifted. And so there are things that really rise, that come to the surface in that isolation and that focus. And so the first lines of that section, David, am I even going to be able to live in this country afterward? In this moment, on this day, that rang out so loudly to me, just in all of the things that are being revealed. Not that I was ignorant to them before, but they're so inescapable now. All of the racial disparity, just all of the inequality, and how for whom the system is designed for, and who does not belong. So that first line really rings out to me, and has been quite emotional in this moment as well.
And just to uplift the simple fact that, I mean, I'll speak for myself as a Black man in this country, dealing with this pandemic, dealing with knowing the facts and the statistics of like who is being affected, and the economic erasure that sometimes that is creating the divisive force that is kind of, who are we afterwards? Like, it's bringing up this whole thing of when we talk about who gets to live here, it's like also who gets to survive and then who gets to thrive here. These notions of what is our humanity during COVID. I think we also have to ask, what was our humanity before COVID? What is our humanity at the response of COVID? What is our humanity during COVID? And then we have to have the conversation, which I think you alluded to, which is a notion that might be found in the Afrofuturistic tradition of the future. What does the future look like? What does this body look like in the future? What does this body, this society look like in the future that allows for it to have the conversation and have the resources necessary to not just survive? Like, what's a conversation of thrivability that we have not seen yet, that this pandemic makes us have to address, making us have to address. And I think some of that is safety, which our last panelist to speak, what brought up was just like her concern of safety. And I would love for her to bring or talk about whatever she would like to bring up. But the idea of what this pandemic is rising to the surface, as far as our ability to figure out who lives, who has the point of living here.
Sorry, I got too emotional by listening to that scene. Many thoughts after the scene. First, from the theater perspective, I really appreciate there are so many theaters nowadays choose playwrights can tell the true story, can tell their true thoughts. And I appreciate the theater companies, and I really appreciate this playwright. They're really brave and courageous to it's not tell a story, it's face themselves, face whatever happened to them. It takes a lot. And
you know what? I want to invite you just to breathe. Because you want to know what? The very simple fact of what is rising up to the surface for you, we can feel without language. And that's the beautiful part about our humanity, right? The beautiful part about when we actually get human, that regardless of time and space and all the continuum of this digital screen, I think that if people actually lean in and listen to what you're saying and how you're saying it, we can almost hear everything that's happening. So just the very honor of being able to breathe with you in this moment is equally as important as the language that will come out. And we want to hear it, but I just invite in this moment, I invite us all, wherever we are, to breathe as much as possible so we can support each other to tell the uncensored and the needed truth, so that we can have a conversation that could hopefully evolve this community of 53 people to lean into our humanity even more by the time it's done.
And what it made me thought about was my daily life. Like every day, you walk on the street, you have the key between your fingers just in case anything happens. the expression you put on your face when you walk out the door. I'm sorry.
No. So I just want to, yes, we can move on. I'm gonna share a personal story so you don't feel alone in this, right? That you feel like we're equal. At least I am equally a part of this with you. Unfortunately, also during COVID, I experienced a hate crime. Hate crime was done towards me, and it was during COVID, and it was my next door neighbor. And that hate crime created a mechanism where I had to have the same kind of vigilance, the same kind of psychic scarring that you are expressing when you talked about the key in between your fingers. I had to buy mace. And this is during quarantine. This is during a notion where I am confined to a very distinct location where the person who was my perpetrator is literally the person I share my wall with. I've been blessed to be able to have the resources to get somewhere else for the time being, but there's so many people who don't have that. So then my other question inside of this is that, what does it mean for us who do, who don't, who are aware? What does it mean to create the awareness that allows for victimhood not to be the destination that we land? What is the healing salve that we all have to participate in as a human community to protect each other and to protect our heart? Because if our heart is robbed of this moment, I don't know who we are afterwards. But Geoffrey, David, what do you your thoughts are coming up?
So one of the things I learned from working on the show was that I wasn't willing to acknowledge that what had happened to me might have been a hate crime, because there's something, and I learned that I felt there's something shameful actually about being the victim of a hate crime, which is odd and counterintuitive, because if anything, right, shouldn't the perpetrator of the hate crime feel shameful, feel shamed? Mm-hmm. And yet, as a victim, I felt like there was something wrong with me. And so I didn't want to admit it until, until I worked it out through the play. And since then, during the COVID period, I got yelled at once at a doctor's office just during a routine checkup. Francis, I think you got yelled at. If you want to tell your story, I haven't actually heard your story. Someone read it on Facebook, but if you don't feel like, obviously. So, it's just been happening a lot, and then you can't, it's fairly obvious that you're being attacked for a racial reason.
Yeah, I was just on my way home from a doctor's appointment, and I was wearing a mask, and a guy not wearing a mask was walking towards me, and he was coming kind of close. So I sort of shifted to avoid him, and he just sort of lunged at me and yelled China virus in my face. And thank God he kept walking, I kept walking. I felt the same sense of shame, just as a gut reflex. And I don't know what would have happened if he'd stopped. But I just on high alert all the time, whenever I'm going to the grocery store, whenever I'm going down to my own lobby, in my own elevator, depending on, I don't know who's going to enter the elevator with me. Just always being on that kind of alert is something that I think a lot of us are experiencing right now.
Yeah. This is connected almost. The word that I'm grabbing onto is that sense of high alert. I've been doing a lot of connecting with friends, as I'm sure many of us have, and we're all having some version of the same conversation, checking in with each other. How are you doing? And in my beginning of this, I was not going outside. You could not have paid me money to go outside. You probably could have set my building on fire, and I would have been like, "That's cool. I'm going to go down with the building." And I recognized that I was going to need to start working with that fear as material, because there will be some moment after. And I didn't want people to have to bust a wall and like drag me out of here to actually get me out into the world. So I started by sitting on the stoop and then eventually walking up and down the block. And now I'm going further. And in the beginning of that beginning, I was so terrified of everything, because I was a potential threat. It's like the language at that moment is that I was a potential threat. So the enemy is within, potentially, my body. And I can, coming in contact with people, potentially transmit a virus to them if I had it.
Yeah.
And then to me. And so moving through my street, a place where I've lived for 6 years, it's like I know people, we know each other, but our faces are covered. So our ability to recognize each other and to deal with each other as human beings, to send each other the messages that we normally send, that is now restrained. And we've been taught now very quickly to view each other as a threat. So holding that space while trying to acknowledge your humanity, that I see and recognize you as a human being, well, I'm going to move away from you, move in the middle of the street, move to the other side of the street. Trying to negotiate that and communicate it was such a hardship that it was like the other thing that drove me inside for far longer. It's like I can deal with what I need to deal with in order to feel comfortable being outside. But what it was asking of me to potentially deny the humanity of other people, or at least to have that read in that way, was too much for me to hold in the beginning.
You know, it's so interesting, because someone brought, as I am dealing with my hate crime situation, someone brought up a beautiful analogy, or a beautiful just evolution of life that we all kind of like witness, or we see the byproduct of, and that's how a butterfly is created. A caterpillar goes into a cocoon not knowing what it's going to come out as. And in the midst of it, everything is broken. Everything is taken away. Everything is destroyed. Every bone, every limb, everything that it once knew. And just we don't even know or can imagine potential fear that caterpillar exemplifies inside of that cocoon, that protective shell, that protective space. Yet after that cocoon, after that moment of gestation, what comes out of that cocoon is something that we all sometimes admonish or love, or just find the brevity of life in, right? Which is a butterfly. Something that's so delicate, something that's so gracious, something that is full of grace. And that it's because of the heart of that caterpillar to go through that cocooning phase that something else is able to come out. So I bring up that story to say what can come out.
Yeah.
Not to go to we're not trying to get to the end of this, but like what can come out of all of this pain, all of this navigation, all of this potential trauma, what can come out? Because I have to imagine, and it's kind of interesting. So this other anecdote, my phone cracked, the screen of my phone cracked as I was leaving my old apartment and trying to get to a place of protection. My phone cracked, but the protective screen did not. But the glass screen underneath the protective screen cracked. An analogy yet again. Broken but protected. The broken pieces that I'm experiencing underneath the protected layer, what does that mean? What is that message that we are experiencing in these stories we're experiencing that's helping us to maybe have another conversation with our humanity? So I would love for us as a collective to really talk about that shared experience.
Yeah. Or
that shared understanding, or where that could potentially lead us to.
I mean, I'm interested in when I sort of started out by saying, you know, we're at this sort of inflection point in terms of where the society goes as we begin to come out of this, as we get to the other side of this. You know, I'm really interested in the fact that, gosh, this is clearly a world pandemic. This suggests our interrelatedness. There's something amazing about the fact that people, humanity, all around the planet, we're all going through a similar experience. So there is a way in which we learn from that and therefore affirm our commonalities and think about the fact, for instance, that, assuming a vaccine is developed, it's not going to actually be effective until everybody can get it. And that would be a great shift in our mentality as human beings if it's possible. The negative side is, no, we shut the borders down more more rigorously, and we become more nationalist and more authoritarian, those things that I was saying earlier. But in a positive sense, I would love to push for the greater recognition of shared humanity. And I have some thoughts about the theater on the other side of this too, but we can talk about that later.
That's not the subject matter of this. This is about humanity, but theater is a part of it. I guess we'll get there. Other panelists. Where does this question of the other side, innovation, and I'll bring it down to my shirt. My shirt says Black Joy, right? And joy is in the resilience of, right? Joy is this idea of the mechanism of, in spite of what's happening, I bring the presence of joy with me. And so, in spite of all that's happening, what presence do we bring that becomes the antithesis of what we're currently experiencing?
Yeah. Yue, I saw you unmute yourself. That suggests to me that you had something you wanted to say.
Go ahead, Geoffrey.
I'm only going to do it because you said that so nicely. One of the things that I'm part of my practice is meditation. And so I've been meditating every single day, just again, trying to work with this material of what's happening in the world and what's happening in this world. And one of the things that has continued to come up for me is to claim the future that I want and to let that future know that I want it. And how do I do that? I do that, I think, in practice. By actually building a set of practices that let that future know I want it. So even as you hear me telling a story about struggling to figure out how to acknowledge humanity on the block, there's a suggestion inside there that it really matters to me to acknowledge humanity. And so it behooves me to try to figure it out. What are the set of practices that I need to build to be able to negotiate that space, that I borrow from you, David, to not close down my own borders and to remain set aside and away from people. So I have become the stoop waver. It's just one practice. I sit on the stoop and I watch people go by in their masks and I see them looking down and not acknowledging people because I'm assuming they're going through something similar to what I have been. And I'm waving at them and saying hello as best as possible through an obstruction. Similarly, when I am moving around the community, when I'm actually out walking, I make it a real point to wave to people. I have not historically been a waver. That is not a move that has been in my repertoire, but it's something that I've had to retrieve from how I grew up. Part of what else is coming up for me is really remembering that so many beautiful practices of shared humanity existed not where I grew up, but I've been socialized away from those things. So remembering those practices and bringing them back has been really huge for me in this moment as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, my wife started to do something like that. She's from the Midwest, and she, came to New York, and she learned not to wave at people in the street.
Yes.
And lately, when we've got, when we're out and we're like, oh, going in the street to avoid somebody, then, she waves, which is kind of a nice way of acknowledging, I see you, and I'm doing this as for all our sakes.
Yue, do you have anything that you want to? Yes, go ahead, all you.
Very similar with what David and Geoffrey just said. I think I have three things. The first is what I've been doing, and I learned from a lot of my Asian friends, which is give love during this period of time, especially when we don't really receive much love from strangers now. We constantly just check with each other, text with each other, or just call them and see if they're okay, see if they feel safe. Of course they don't, but we talk to each other. That definitely helps. A lot of friends feel angry and we talk with each other and express our feelings. And sometimes I organize like a virtual potluck. We eat together online and for a dinner. So that really helped.
Yeah.
And many of my friends who from Columbia graduated, they went back to either China, Korea, back to their home, and they constantly text me overseas, are you okay? Do you need any masks? We can send it to you. If you need anything, just let us know. Just small gestures just make me feel so warm and make me feel so being taken care of, even though we were not that close to each other when we were in school. But because of this, I feel it brought us so close. Something we find each other, the bond, the connection between human being to another human being. And another thing I learned is be more sympathetic, because there are so many people just put their hate towards the entire Asian community. And I think also because being a person of color, live in this country for not as long as you guys had moved here, but I've just tried to always question myself when things happen. I always blame myself because I'm not good enough, because problem is me. And now I just always learn how I stand in other people's shoes to think from their perspective. And I try to understand why they're so afraid and why they hate us so much. And I try to understand their fear because I have the same fear. So I just try to be more sympathetic. I try to learn them, try to understand them. And then I realize a lot of hate and a lot of racism or other type of violence come from ignorance. So I also, from myself, I try to educate myself and then try to educate my friend, the people close to me. Like when I go online, the first 3 weeks of the lockdown, I was obsessed with reading all the hatred messages on social media. I just like obsessed with reading why people hate us so much. A lot of people just say, I blame everyone who still eat meat. I blame whoever haven't turned into a vegetarian yet. Or I blame the government. I blame this and that. And the first thing people hear doing is just point a finger to someone else and claim themselves as a victim. And I realized the problem of that is they didn't see through the whole history, the whole culture, and the whole circumstances of other people. And some of my friends actually who are white didn't really understand. Through phone calls, I try to explain the history, the culture, and why we're doing certain things like this and that, or just tell them that's not true. Actually really helpful for them to understand. And from there, I try to learn more and try to read more history here and in China. So it's really helpful for me to communicate with my friend and some not friendly people, if they're open to have a conversation. And I encourage people use this lockdown period of time when you have definitely more free time to use. Try to learn something more instead of just being hysterical towards another community or certain people. Go read some books about China. Go read some books about Asian countries and the custom and their diet, and learn about politics instead of just believe whatever the media gave you to believe. There are a lot of things for everyone to learn. I feel people need to calm down and start from educating themselves.
So it's actually, thank you. I just want to uplift some beautiful nuggets that came from, there's a lot of beautiful nuggets that came out from what you just shared. One thing for me was simple gestures of kindness, how those simple gestures of kindness can help to mitigate some of what someone might be dealing with. We don't know what everyone's dealing with, but the simple acts of gestures are really important, which is umbrellaed by this really powerful thing that I think is a part of the innovation of what can happen in this moment, which is compassionate leadership. What does it mean to lead from a space of compassion? What does it mean to really see myself as my sister and my brother's keeper? That regardless of race, which is a construct, regardless of all of the divisive things, economic divisive things that we have positioned to help us to create hierarchy. What's beautiful, if there is a beautiful silver lining to COVID-19, is that it is, although it is just decimating and hurting and killing so many people, it is also creating the great equalizer. The idea of hierarchy and hierarchy of where we used to be is kind of not there anymore. There is this notion that we can now, if you know of viewpoints, if you know of chaos theory, as Mary Overly, a teacher at NYU, once put it, there actually is a unilateral sense to the ground right now, where we can connect with each other in ways in which we never got to do before. And if we lead with compassionate leadership, not patriarchal leadership, not capitalistic leadership, but compassionate leadership, there is something transformative that can happen. That this moment can be a teaching tool for us, as David, you were saying, to actually move forward versus regress and become kind of the stewards of nationalism, the stewards of bigotry. So now that we have 15 more minutes, and before we get to that round, I just want to do a round of and I'm gonna get to the questions that are being sent to me, but as I prepare for that, if people can talk about theater, where is theater going to go in your eyes? What is possible to this very ancient art form that is now being challenged by a current pandemic? What is possible in this moment?
Well, I'll start because I had started to say I wanted to say something about theater. I'm struck by, first of all, let me put in a context, which is the historical memory, our national historical memory of the 1918 pandemic. Like, it didn't really exist that much in American culture. Like, we think of World War II, we think of Vietnam, we think of the Kennedy assassination, 9/11, blah, blah. But the 1918 pandemic kind of happened and then didn't make an impact in the national consciousness. And if anything, was followed by the Roaring '20s, which was, this extremely, everybody got out of quarantine and kind of wanted to be together. And so I think that the desire to want to have human contact and to have a shared experience, which is inherent in live theater, will continue when we're able to do so safely. But the part of me is optimistic, hopes that, and this is really about the commercial theater, it's more about Broadway and stuff, but I'm hoping that things like, so I feel like Broadway is resistant to change because it was so profitable. And it's going to be harder to be profitable again, not in the way that things were, last year. And I hope that means that there's more opportunity for innovation. There's more willingness to take chances. Ticket prices are going to need to be lower. People are going to have to appeal to a wider audience in terms of younger people, in terms of diverse audiences. Maybe we're not going to be so dependent on tourism because it's going to take a while for the tourists to come back. And if you think about, like, I was reading about, or I was hearing about the history of Sunday in the Park with George. Sunday in the Park with George got booked into the Booth Theater when the second act hadn't even been written yet. And that's because theater owners were just looking for something to put in the theaters, and the same during the original M. Butterfly, that M. Butterfly and Into the Woods got put into the Jansen theaters because they were just looking for stuff to do. So I'm hoping that might change the economics of Broadway and increase creativity and innovation in a useful way.
Yue or Geoffrey? I see you leaning in, Yue. Come on, come on. Or Geoffrey, whichever one.
Yue has like a scratch pad and some Post-its and is like,
I mean,
Yue is very clearly architecting the way out. So we've got to hold space for that.
We do.
Sorry. I think just from my point of view, personally, what I've been doing is I sign up for shelter, foster family, so I can foster all the sheltered animals. And I have a really small apartment, but I just want to do my best to help as many animals I can. I really love animals. And because of taking care of the animals, I put the bird seeds outside my window and watching all the bird eating it. I just realized when I'm treating other species, they're all the same to me. And why, as a human being, we can't see the truth that we're the same species and we choose to hurt and hate each other instead of helping each other. So the second point is I just hope after this, we learn that when viruses attack human beings, they don't choose the race because we're the same. We build up the same self, same bone structure, we're the same. So when things happen, I hope everyone can work together and support each other. Hate each other and hurting each other can only hurt everyone. I don't see any benefit of it. And also I hope after this, for Asian communities and for all the people of color communities, can for themselves learn, be tougher, be stronger. That's a process. I'm still working on that. And I hope in the whole society, we can figure out some ways to help them, to recognize them, to support them. It need everyone's work, everyone to still work together on this goal.
Thank you.
There are 1,000 things to say, and both of what David and Yue have said are 999 of them. So one thing, there is a relationship that I see. So again, being an indoor kid now for almost 60 days, there's something that I have been witness to in a lot of our arts and cultural organizations creating virtual programming. I would be critical and say that in the beginning, maybe the motive there was, please don't forget me. And so I'm gonna put something into the universe so that you don't forget that we exist. So whether that is true as the motivation for some or no, what has happened in my experience of attending or participating, the fact that we can all see each other's faces, those of us who have opted into that, that's different than my experience of sitting in a theater in the dark. Yeah. I can see you, and in some iterations of this conversation, I can actually chat directly to you. There is a recognition of our desire to be together in ways that are collaborative and connective as opposed to consumptive, where all of the magic happens on the stage, if I can say it that way, which isn't necessarily how I truly feel about the theater, but at its most sinister, that can be its manifestation. That all the magic happens up here in front of us and we are invited to bear witness to that magic. There is something else that is happening in this moment. New relationships are being developed between institutions and people, and new relationships are being developed between people and each other.
Yeah.
So in the after, it can only be, I think, that now that we've sparked an appetite and interest in this way, that must continue and be sustained.
Agreed. Francis, do you want to, and then I have one more question after this. Francis, do you want to answer? And congratulations again.
Well, thank you. In thinking about the future, I have to reflect back on this last season, which I had the good fortune to participate in off-Broadway. And I can't remember a season that felt as innovative or as inclusive as groundbreaking. You know, at the time that I was doing Cambodian rock band, when theaters shut down, I think that there were 4 or 5, maybe 6 plays going on at the same time that were telling Asian American stories with Asian Americans on stage from Asian American perspectives or Asian perspectives. And I can't remember a time when that was even imagined. And so it just felt like we were a real part of the scene. And I felt this overwhelming need for these shows. And for the great variety of shows that were happening over this season. And I think that the love that was spread out by the Lortels over many different shows, many different productions, it wasn't like one show got everything, it often happens, was a reflection of just how off-Broadway seems to be evolving, and our consciousness seems to be evolving too, not just in terms of what we wanted to consume, but who we imagined was part of our human story. And so reflecting on all of that makes me very hopeful that when we return, we're gonna still be answering the call to tell stories with that kind of inclusiveness and that kind of experimentation and that kind of generosity. And I think that what Geoffrey, Jue, and David said about us, connecting in these new ways that are great, nowhere near as satisfying as being in a room together. But still, we are still creating connections, and I'm hoping that we can build on those connections when we don't have to do it electronically, and we can come back in the same room together.
I mean, the very powerful thing that you're bringing up is the resilience of intimacy, human intimacy. If humans are nothing, we are intimate, right? Our intimate vibration, and it doesn't have to deal. That has nothing to do with sex or sexual. It can, but like the very nature of just listening intently, and allowing that listening intently to transmit an energetical force. This is just energy transmitted, right? And so, like this moment, we get to amplify our notion of intimacy in a way in which that we never got to do before. We never got to really think about how we can transmit the intimacy of compassion, the intimacy of a hug, the intimacy of reaching out and touching someone, because we were given the privilege of just having it to us whenever we want it, right? There was a little bit of like, oh, I can just go down the street and make it happen, or oh, I can da-da-da-da. But now we have to be more intentional about it. There's an intentionality in our thriving and intentionality in our survival. Before we end, and we end with another piece by you, Francis, you reading another piece, I would love everyone just to quickly, popcorn style, just say, how are you being, there's a question from our lovely community who's watching in on us. What does productivity look like when we are being asked to pause? If you all could just popcorn really quickly, bring up and then like 1 or 2 sentences, what does productivity look like when we have been asked to pause? Geoffrey, why don't you go first?
Well, shit, okay. I'll just have to play first thought, best thought then. But if you ask me in 5 minutes, I'll say something different. What does productivity look like in this moment when we've been asked to pause?
Yes.
Raggedy.
There we go. Yue, productivity when we have been asked to pause.
Sorry, I don't know. Can you come back to me?
Yes, David, productivity when we have been asked to pause.
I mean, I'm a writer, so it's not that different.
But I do have a question around this. Are you able to write at the same frequency, knowing that the constraints of the world around you have shifted?
I think I still, basically I'm on the same writer schedule.
Okay,
but then my afternoons are mostly on Zoom.
Oh, okay, great. So productivity is still on the same vibration. Yue, do you have an answer to what productivity looks like when we have been asked to pause?
Yes, our workload's still high. We have so many amazing programs online, so I recommend everyone to participate. But I feel because I stay home every day, it's not as focused as before. I can have more time to develop my own hobbies. I can learn new languages. I sign up for so many Duolingo programs and read so many books. It's just not as focused as before.
As it was.
But it's more fun. It's more vibrant.
Yeah.
Besides the outside.
And Francis, for you, and then take us away. What does productivity look like in this age when we've been asked to pause?
You make me feel so ashamed.
No shame. There's no shame.
She's so productive. I think that for me, because since the work stoppage, it's been busier than ever. The most productive thing that I've actually tried to learn is how to pause, is how to take a moment to rest and not constantly be worrying about how to have the best quarantine possible.
And without further ado, Francis, do you mind giving us the last artistic offering before we wrap up and we go on for the rest of our evening?
Sure. This is from the very end of David Henry Hwang and Janine Tesori's Soft Power. My attacker had severed my vertebral artery, making me lose about 1/3 of my blood. I should have bled out, or at least suffered a stroke. And my crime remains unsolved. The best police theory is not so different from what happened in my dream, that I was targeted because of my appearance. My assailant mistook me for an Asian delivery person, then ran away when I yelled, "What the fuck," in unaccented English, and left me to die. All my life, I've been waiting for this to happen. All my life, I've walked down streets where people have assumed I don't belong. All my life, I feared I was marked for something terrible because of this face. And now it's finally happened. And yet, I didn't die. And when the worst thing in the world actually happens, but you somehow survive, you feel, at least for a moment, like you can do anything. So I wrote this show. There's a saying, 大难不死，必有后福. Good fortune will follow if we somehow survive.
And as we conclude this session, I want to say thank you to Daniela and her amazing team for the support to create such a dynamic, needed space for us to be able to communicate with one another. Thank you to the Rattlestick team, everyone at Rattlestick. And I want to just really lean into this idea of when we survive, we're allowed to survive as long as we want to, but we just got to survive. We don't have to thrive. All we have to do is survive this moment. Thriving can happen at any moment in time. But if we can all just breathe in the opportunity of how are we going to survive as a one human race, loving each other more, finding out where compassion lies, and envisioning where our joy can give us our next opportunity to be curious. I think something about our humanity can actually stay intact and also support the evolution of our communities, our homes, and potentially, if we will think of the butterfly effect, our nation. I thank you so much for joining us, and have a fantastic evening.